Resuming debate.
Resuming debate.
Resuming debate.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to what will be, I think, our final episode of Resuming Debate before we begin a bit of a summer hiatus. I hope you've enjoyed the episodes we've had over the fall and spring of this parliamentary session. And we're going to be tools down likely for July and August, and then come back with some more of these long-form, substantial discussions on the issues of the day when things start up again in September. So one of the big issues, if you've been following my work over the last especially few months, has been the work we've been doing on government contracting. When the federal government has work that they need done that they cannot or feel that they cannot do internally with the public service, they contract it out. They hire external private firms to fulfill certain tasks for them. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. There may be some cases where this is necessary, but the contracting out of the federal government has come under significant scrutiny, especially in the context of the ArriveScam scandal, a case where the government clearly vastly overpaid. They contracted out to a couple firms that were tiny firms. The firms that got the contracts didn't do any real work on the project. They just in most cases got the contract and then subcontracted, and there were aspects of the way the contracting out process happened that weren't transparent. There was a lack of documentation. There were lots of problems with it that suggested that money was your money, taxpayers' money, was being given to certain private firms with no meaningful justification. So this is a larger problem in government procurement. We're going to talk about one aspect of government procurement, government contracting, that is Indigenous procurement, something that's also been in the news lately. Now, in the context of contracting out services, the government has a policy of trying to ensure the inclusion of Indigenous firms in that process by having a set aside, so that's a policy that is that has good intentions, is designed to build up Indigenous businesses in this country, and that should be designed to create opportunity and opportunities for economic growth and business development for Indigenous Canadians. There have, though, through the ArriveScam issue and other cases, been the revelation of certain problems in the Indigenous procurement system, and we're going to get into that and how those problems can be fixed. I'm very pleased to be joined today for this conversation by a very successful Indigenous business leader who has spoken out about some of these problems in Indigenous contracting with the federal government, and actually spoke out about this, I think, 18 years ago before a Senate committee, if only his warnings had been heeded. John Bernard from Donna Cona, the CEO there, thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me.
John, I wonder if you can start by sharing a little bit about yourself and your story, building up your own very successful business.
Okay, well, I started out in the federal government after I graduated university. I am from the Madawaska Maliseet First Nation in New Brunswick. Shortly after I graduated, I realized very quickly that there was no way I was going to be. I have an IT background. I'm thinking I'd get into IT there. So after bouncing around to a number of cities, ended up in Ottawa. Worked for the Department of Health and Welfare, Fisheries and Oceans, and back then Indian Northern Affairs, or it was called Indian Affairs. So in 1990, I'm going to say 1991, I resigned and became an independent contractor as an IT consultant. I joined up at another company, Systems Interface, and I was trying to encourage them to hire Aboriginal employees and go after some Indian Northern Affairs contracts, thinking we'd get some sort of recognition points. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. Back then, there really was no Aboriginal benefits or procurement strategy. But in 1996, they came out with the procurement strategy for Aboriginal business, PSAP. It's called PSIB today, Aboriginal business, Indigenous business. So we immediately continued to hire Aboriginals. Back then, I was 51% owner. Today, I own 100%. And we started going after Aboriginal opportunities as soon as we could. But it didn't stop there. the whole idea of the PSIB, I'm going to call it the PSIB program, was to encourage and grow Aboriginal businesses and also Aboriginal benefits. Aboriginal benefits being those like giving a scholarship to Indigenous people or sponsoring a community or things like that. And also hiring an Aboriginal business such as Donna Cona. And so in Donna Cona, I ran a business before Donna Cona, an IT business, and people often ask me, well, what is the difference between what you were doing before and now calling it an Aboriginal business? And I said, well, actually, not much other than what I've always done, which is it's not how many Indigenous people we have working for us, although we do hire Indigenous people as much as possible. It's not that I am Indigenous and I own 51% or more. I am Indigenous. I'm actually from a reserve. My sister, my mother were chiefs of my community. In fact, one of my sisters was the acting national chief for 6 months, not that long ago. So there's no question about my Indigenous background and stuff. But I felt that the reason I could call myself Aboriginal was about the things that I did. I was sponsoring Aboriginal, not just hiring. I was sponsoring Aboriginal. I had scholarships. I was sponsoring anything Aboriginal I could, whether it be a Aboriginal hockey game, junior hockey game, or the Aboriginal Achievement Awards, or the Wabano Health Center. These are the things that I was doing that I felt that, not just because I was Aboriginal, but the reason I felt that I could call myself an Aboriginal business and felt that I could go after Aboriginal set-asides.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Is it, just jumping in there, is it, I mean, it seems to me that it's probably a theoretical challenge for the federal government, a non-Indigenous institution, to come in and define what constitutes an Indigenous business and what doesn't constitute an Indigenous business. You're talking about a particular definition that is really more based in what you do and your presence in communities. And that seems like a clear case, but there are probably a lot of more marginal cases, right? Where and so how does the federal government, an institution that is separate from those communities, come up with a definition?
Well, the federal government came up with a definition that the business had to be at least 51% owned or controlled. At that time, if you were more than 6 employees, 1/3 of them had to be Aboriginal. And there was even some content like saying that the work, 1/3 of the work had to, or 2/3 of the work had to be done by Aboriginals. I never was quite sure whether they meant it had to be done by the Aboriginal business or an Aboriginal person. Well, you can well imagine that in the IT industry, it was pretty tough. I mean, if I had 6 people, it wasn't that tough to find 2 Aboriginals. But if I had 60 people or 100 people, it was becoming more and more difficult to find qualified IT Aboriginal people, because that really wasn't something we were led or to, like there's a lot of political science that was often being pushed on Indigenous students and stuff like that. So, but even then, I still felt that was not the way to go. It should have always been about Aboriginal benefits, because Aboriginal benefits are so much easier and they're far more rewarding for Aboriginals in general. So you didn't have this where, like you saw with the ArriveScam, oh, so you're getting rich. How many Aboriginals work for you? 2, and you got a 9. You didn't get any of that. But I will tell you though that 18 years ago, when they were coming up with this definition, it became pretty clear to me that this could get abused, particularly as it relates to joint ventures. Because a joint venture, as long as the Aboriginal side of the joint venture was 51% controlled, it qualified to go after Aboriginal businesses. But that could be one person, one person that just found out that they're Aboriginal. I mean, 2 days ago, they didn't know. They found out they had an ancestor and that they could qualify, and boom, they're going after a $100 million contract. And what I feel like I want to be careful here. I am not trying to hurt Aboriginal businesses. In fact, I'm trying to help them. I believe that what should have been said by the government was to the non-Indigenous company, look, if you're gonna joint venture with this Indigenous person or company, you best make sure that that Indigenous person gets their fair share, 51% of the profits. Because if we find out later on that you were giving them a couple of points, throw them a little bit of money, and this was all a scam or a shell company, as we call it, then you're going to get penalized. And that would put some sort of accountability, because really there is no accountability. Honest to God, there's none. I mean, you yourself today could go and find an Aboriginal that's probably unemployed and never worked in their life, and if you qualified, could create a joint venture and go after $100 million, and that person might not even know the name of the contract. And here's the thing: there's no accountability. If they find out later and say, "Oh, that person never worked. That person is not even employed." And that person has never been in your building, and that person has never hired a person in life. Well, guess what? There's no accountability to you. What do you care, right?
So just to put a fine point on it, what you're describing in terms of the joint venture is a case where you have two companies. One qualifies as an Indigenous company, one does not. Then they come together to jointly bid on some kind of a project, and it may be that substantively the knowledge about that project and the work on the project is carried by the non-Indigenous partner, but the presence of the Indigenous company in that partnership allows that joint venture to get the contracts that are set aside. But in the process, there's no capacity that's built. There's no benefits flowing back to the Indigenous community. It's essentially just that the non-Indigenous company has been able to take advantage of a set-aside that was intended for Indigenous companies by entering into a nominal joint venture. That's essentially what you're describing, right?
That's exactly what I said. But I'm talking about programs only for like a set-aside.
Yeah.
I mean, why would you create a joint venture with somebody that brings nothing to the table, right? And you said essentially, how about 100%? The non-Indigenous can bring 100% of the quality and can do 100% of the work, and just throw a few points to and that's not fair to the Aboriginal person either, because the whole idea was to build Aboriginal economic development. I mean, right. Like the company should be forced into giving their fair share to the Aboriginal, so that Aboriginal company can grow. They can hire their own staff, and maybe they can give back to their community, similar to what I've done. Like I've spun off, because of success, I've spun off and able to start businesses on my reserve, where my community is making a lot of money from my success on Donna Cona and versus set-asides. Now, just so you know, my company, we only do about 30% of our total revenue is from set-asides. In the beginning, we did quite a bit, but as we got bigger, we were able to go after everything, not just set-asides. And we do maybe 4% of revenue from joint ventures. But I'll bet you go out and look at those set-aside, those joint ventures now, and you're going to find that they do anywhere from 95 to 100% of joint venture revenue. And probably 100% of set-asides only. In other words, they're not building. The Aboriginal company is not building, and by no fault of their own, because they're not getting their fair share. And I believe that the government would do well to say, this is not going to continue to happen. That Aboriginal person, assuming they qualify as Indigenous, you are going to give them. And if we find out you didn't, then we are going to penalize you. And what that would do is that would set a lot of these non-Indigenous companies back, saying, okay, I don't want to be any part of this if I have to be accountable.
When you appeared before the Senate almost 2 decades ago, you also warned about disincentives or challenges for growth. And I want you to kind of expand on this more, that not only are Indigenous businesses not given the capacity to grow with the current system, but that if you have you mentioned the case of, you've got 6 employees, two of which are Indigenous, then you qualify. if you are starting a new project, you want to expand, and you want to quickly hire 3 more employees, then all of a sudden you fall below that 1/3 threshold. So in that case, you can't grow while maintaining that status. So instead, you have to contract out, enter into joint venture, because you have to always maintain that that ratio. Is it the same now as it was when you testified before the Senate? Has that system evolved at all, or are the same problems inherent in the system?
You're correct. That's how it was, and it has evolved. It's not like that anymore, because the incentive, like I said, it was actually de-incentivized. People were not motivated to grow, because if they grew, and then they became non-compliant, what was the point? It's also the same, and I apologize for keep harping on this, but it's the same as the joint ventures. If they're not being accountable and the person is walking away with a couple of points, I don't know, making $5,000 a month, why would he want, and not doing anything, nothing at all, not even meeting with the client, had no staff, no admin staff, doing nothing? Well, where's the incentive for that person to want to grow a company? I mean, you want that person to want to grow, and because that's what it's all about, right? So no, yes, it has changed. You no longer have to have 33% Aboriginal employees. You still have to be owned and controlled. Okay, people have to start somewhere. That's where when I get in these conversations, it's always like, what, you don't want any other Aboriginal company to grow? No, I just think that they ought to want to grow. And right now, I'm sorry, but it's not really laid out well. And my other fear is that the government's going to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, look, see, these things don't work. Well, they do work. There are a lot of Aboriginal firms out there that are successful, including Donna Cona, and have done well. It's just that when the government said, okay, here's 5%, or you have to do 5%, all of a sudden it was all the non-Indigenouses that woke up and said, whoa, I want a piece of that pie.
Right.
How do I go about getting it? And there are experts out there that will show you how to do that and tell you, in fact, and even I've been approached to do a joint venture. They don't realize who I am right away. They hear Donna Cona, and they come in and we say, okay, we're gonna take over this part. Oh, no, that's we don't want you to do that. We're gonna do this. We just need a partner. And I said, well, that's not the point. The point of the set-asides are that we have control of this. Well, we don't want you to have control. Well, then maybe you shouldn't be going after a set-aside. Like that, right. Honestly, and it's a real blow to them. And I've seen a lot of them come and go, and then they go off and find another token Indian, and they're out there, they're a shell company. And it can, and I think, well, it's been going on for 20 years. I saw it 20 years ago, and I see it today, and it continues, and now it's worse than ever because of the clients. They're under obligations to give, and so the client, on the client side, being the federal government, you got to, like, they're under obligations. They've got to meet their 5% quota. So they're not the ones that are looking for the shell companies. They're just putting out set-asides and hoping for the best. It's on our side that I feel the abuse is coming.
Yeah, you talked about as an alternative model emphasizing benefits to communities, and I think this should be the purpose of the program is to actually realize growth, development, increase in opportunity for Indigenous communities. How could such a thing be measured? Have you thought about specifically? I mean, obviously, you're doing it at Donna Cona out of a sense of conviction and attachment to your community. But if the government were to include a community benefit criteria, then it would have to be measured in some way and assessed. Do you think the federal government could do that?
Absolutely. And so just for the record, I didn't come up with Aboriginal benefits. This is not new. It's been talked about for a long time. Probably around that same period, 18 years ago, we started an organization called the Procurement Strategy. We call it PSABA. So it was basically an association that would help the government to come up with ways of Aboriginal benefits. So it's not new. But unfortunately, 18 years ago, I didn't have a champion in the government. And oftentimes, anything that the government, I feel you need to have a champion at a certain level that can say, yeah, this is a good idea. Let's go with this. But as much as I love Aboriginal benefits, that as well it can be abused. And like there were very large contracts, hundreds of millions of dollar contracts, where Donna Cona could not bid. And we weren't about to joint venture on a big company like that or other people didn't want to joint venture. But so what the government said, okay, well, you got to show 25% of Aboriginal benefit. So they went around and found anyone they could that they thought that could help them or they could give benefit to. And they'd come to Donna Cona and say, look, would you be willing to come with us? And we're going to bid on this $200 million contract and we're going to give you a percentage of the work. 4 years later, well, where's the work? Did we get any work? Oh, it's complicated. We can't do it. Nobody's watching that. And there is no abundance or anyone that I can go see to say, hey, these guys said they were going to use us. And you got to be careful too, because the industry is not as large as you may think. It's a small world. If I start, you don't bite the hand that feeds you. I don't start going in there and telling the departments, hey, these guys, all of a sudden then I'm pissing everybody off,
Yeah. So there's basically the enforcement issue, right? So there's the questions of what the rules should be, and then there's a question of whether the existing rules are being followed. And we've been tracking this on subcontracts as well, because if you're getting a contract as an Indigenous business, there's supposed to be a certain percentage of subcontracts that go to Indigenous businesses if it's part of the set aside. And yet we've asked for that information at committee, and we're not getting it. That don't seem to be tracking subcontracts at all.
Yeah, and again, like I said, we do so little of that kind of work. I mean, you come to Donna Cona, we're a real company. I mean, we don't have an Indigenous guy in the back janitor, office being our shell. And again, like I said, I saw this coming. It's still here. The ArriveScam, all it did was just, show what was always been there.
Yeah.
But and it all has to come down to, not just policing it, but also there being accountability. Any company going in there, no matter how big they are, non-Indigenous, can do this and know that if it doesn't work out, I'm not getting in trouble. We don't even look bad. But if all of a sudden there was some sort of accountability and there was an organization there that said, well, look, you just took advantage of this. And that person never got nothing, And it's particularly by the services company. In the product world, well, it's I mean, they're making product. They're part of the company that makes product, and they can grow fine. But it's in that services world where all of a sudden you see an ice cream truck driver running $100 million, and there's nothing that eats away at me more than
Yeah, I think in terms of accountability, as the public becomes more aware of this, there will be a very strong negative reaction to it because there's a lot of public awareness just about the injustices Indigenous peoples have faced, the poverty, and that when you have programs that are intended to elevate the condition of Indigenous peoples that are then being abused, I think that there's a lot of potential for holding people that are involved in this accountable. I wanted to ask you a bit about IT specifically, because we have discovered sort of through the ArriveScam debate just how common this model of receiving contracts and then subcontracting is. They call it staff augmentation, right? Where the government doesn't have all the expertise inside of it on certain IT projects, so they go to external companies. But instead of the government being able to go directly to the person who can do the work, they hire a staff augmentation firm that then goes and hires the IT professionals, and the staff augmentation firm gets money in the middle. There's over 600 of these firms. What do you think about this sort of staff augmentation model? Is that kind of lending itself to a lot of abuse, and why can't the government have more IT experience or IT expertise inside of the permanent public service?
Okay, so we're going to step outside of Indigenous procurement here for a minute.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think they relate to each other because, but
There's no, there's no that to relate, but there's still, I mean, even if there was no Indigenous procurement, there still would be augmentation staffing companies.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm going to tell you from being on both sides of the table, I was a government employee.
Yeah.
I was the chief of operations, and I did have a budget, and I did hire people and to do projects. And when you're in the government, and particularly the federal government, I suppose it doesn't really matter, but if when you're in the government and you want to get something done, and it's a project for just a month or 2 months or even 3 months, if you have to hire somebody, the process of hiring that person and a decent amount of time, and then having to let that person go because it's just a project. You're talking a lot of work. Oftentimes things get delayed. So what in the IT world, because projects tend to be, there's a lot of short-term projects, they come up, they come, they go, they leave. So they put together these vehicles, okay? And these vehicles are called call-ups, where all these augmentation companies or staffing companies will put a bid on. Now, that they're vetted. It's not just anybody can do this. They're vetted. They got to make sure that the company meets all the security. They've got to make sure that this company has done some certain projects of certain sizes, right? And then they get on these call-ups, and then from there, a government manager can say, okay, well, I need 5 resources for 2 months. Here you go. And guess what? Oh, by the way, that resource, that doesn't meet my requirement. Don't even send that person here tomorrow. Try to do that as a government employee. Try to do that to a government employee. That's not going to work. I mean, you've now got to live with that employee for the next 3 months or however long the project is. And if you try to get rid of them, then the process is long and drawn out. And again, I'm kind of moving away from Indigenous. I'm talking about my experience as why does the government have these call-ups and we call them vehicles,
right?
And you can be sure that these vehicles aren't just given. There's high competition for them. A lot of people try to bid for them. And they don't always get in. Some get in, some don't. And usually it's by invite. And they don't go invite all 400 or how many you said. They'll invite 15. And then those 15 are battling to get on that call up right there. And they got to meet with and again, another issue with that is, although you said there might be, what did you say? There was 400?
I think over 600.
Okay, so 600. I can guarantee you that those 600 companies are using the same resources. Particularly in Ottawa here. Ottawa's not that big.
Yeah.
And I could remember a time when the government came in and said, okay, we want you to bid on this, and it has to be absolutely exclusive. In other words, company A over here, you can't be using a resource that company B is using.
Right.
Okay. And that caused chaos because the industry wasn't that big. So what did everybody have to do? Everybody had to joint venture.
Right.
Okay. Joint ventures are good. I mean, can be good in case like that. But now remember, there was no, and of course, when the Canada set aside, the same issues happened with joint venturing. But so that's where I stand on that. And it's usually a pendulum swing. So I've been around for 40 some odd years, and I've seen it where you've got managers come in and say, "That's it, we're outsourcing everything."
Right.
And then usually what happens is all kinds of havoc and chaos. Well, and then it goes, it pendulum swings to the other. Okay, well, I'm outsourcing everything.
Right.
So, but if you're asking me personally, I believe there's a fine middle ground to that.
Okay.
I
think what surprises a lot of people looking at the trajectory of this government is we have seen a big growth in the public service and a growth in outside contract spending, right? So I guess the challenge looking at it from the outside is, okay, you can sort of understand how there might be philosophically kind of a pendulum swing. Some governments are more inclined to outsourcing, some governments are more inclined to keeping it in the public service for whatever reason. But the fact that we see growth in outside spending and inside spending, Yeah, and I guess just the relationship to Indigenous procurement, like in terms of these resources, right? Like, is there a growth in like the final resource, the people that are doing the work who are being fed into government projects through these vehicles? Are we seeing a growth in Indigenous people being able to take on these positions as resources, or is it has it more been a growth at the level of the vehicles?
Level of the vehicles. In 1999, I started a scholarship at Trent University, and then 4 years later, I was asking for an update, and I was quite shocked that it was never used. I was taken aback, and so I said, "Well, what's going on?" Well, Mr. Bernard, they said you said that it had to be for a computer science student, and or I said, "Well, I didn't say computer science. I said that they had to have a computer science background." And he said, "Well, nobody qualified." So I had to revamp my criteria and say, "Okay, well, how about anybody that had an interest in computer science or any," and that didn't work. And then I had to revamp it again. Anybody that was involved with, and I was curious as, well, what's going on here? I mean, I would have thought that computers and would have been of great interest to particularly First Nations up north, because it's the great divider, right? It's
Right.
it's the great equalizer.
Yeah.
But here's where it falls apart, and a lot of people don't realize this. I went and I flew up north, and I was speaking at my dime, my cost, speaking to students, trying to encourage them to get into technology and the internet, stuff like that. And I was telling them that there's going to come a day when you won't have to leave your hometown like I did. I had to leave my community, and I would ask them, okay, how many of you have been on the internet? And almost all of them had, from some sort of program like SchoolNet. And how many of you liked it? And I might get one, which was really surprising, because you would think that young teenage Indigenous or non-Indigenous, they would love the internet. But what people down here, close to the urban areas, don't understand is that, and they would sit there and say, well, they have 2400 baud or 9600 baud call-up, and we had that too, so they got to grow like we do. No, when we had 2400 baud call-up or 9600 baud call-up, websites were designed. They were designed to handle that speed. But as we got faster and we created our websites to take advantage of that speed, they're still running at 2400 baud. And I can tell you why Google is one of the most popular, because if you go to Google, what pops up? A real small, simple page. It isn't full of news, and it's just Google. And I don't care how fast you're going, whether you're on a 2400 baud or you're on a Starlink, that Google page pops up pretty quickly. But so you can understand why this kids up there were saying, I was there I waited 15 minutes and it was all choppy. And so to answer your question, is it getting better? Yes, it is. It is getting better. Is it an epidemic, or is it? No. I still believe that Aboriginal students, Indigenous students, are pushed more to political science and into those kind of the environment. I mean, which are all worthy causes for sure. But
who's doing that? Who's doing that pushing? Do you think, is that kind of from society as a whole, or is it from
counselors? If you would probably, I don't know about today, but I recall at the time, if you were an Indigenous student and you went to go see a counselor and said, what would you recommend? A lot of them would be recommending, poli-sci or the environment, as today especially. You were getting a whole lot of them pushing, information technology, because that's what's going to keep you in your community. Right. That's what's going to say,
So these would be school-based guidance counselors you're talking about, that they would kind of, in your experience, tend to kind of project and direct Indigenous students towards those kinds of fields.
I did, especially, back in the day, because I don't know if it was maybe looked down upon, or that you didn't want to push a student into something that would force them to move out of their community. I mean, up north, we know where they're all pushed, right? They're all pushed into the
Right.
into
I
the
guess
work.
the perception would have been at one time that IT meant leaving your community, whereas you're pointing out
Not
that
today.
now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's one of these incredible things about the modern technology is we maybe, like, for the last few hundred years since the Industrial Revolution, there was this going out to work meant more and more leaving your home, leaving your community for people in every part of the world, and now we're in a new world where maybe it's going to become increasingly possible for people to stay in this rural community, Indigenous community, where they grew up, and be a professor, a consultant, to do that work. So you mentioned speed of the internet. So it seems like what you're recommending that we think about in terms of building up opportunity for Indigenous peoples in Canada is broadband education, so that people have access to the tools, they learn about how to use those tools, and if you have the right education and the right internet connection, you can do almost anything from anywhere.
Well, again, an example, a real life example. So Donna Cona, by the way, our claim to fame is we're in a Trivial Pursuit question. And the question in Trivial Pursuit is, which territory did Aboriginal and Donna Cona install the first totally satellite-based network? And the answer is none of it. And back in the day, we would go, when we were going up there trying to install this network, we often would get there and we'd have the planes would, the supply planes were coming in, and half of our equipment was gone because food is a priority. So they don't sit there and say, well, geez, this part goes with that part. They just pull it off and say, put food. So what should have taken one trip would often take 3 or 4 trips.
Yeah.
And whenever we were trying to work on the internet or work on the network, and there'd be a glitch, we'd go down and all the techies would be down there trying to get it working, and come back up and say, okay, everybody can turn their computers back on. And the office was gone. And so, well, where did everybody go? Well, so they left. I said, well, where did they left? Well, they left. They went hunting or whatever. I said, why? They said, well, because back in the day when there was a glitch, it lasted for a week. So here we are trying to work. Now, I wish that I could have predicted what happened today back then, but we were trying to get a bandwidth going that we could then pull up there. I did not predict that there would be an Elon Musk that would go up there and put 100 satellites that would give these guys the same speed that I could have here. I mean, I wish I could have predicted that. I predicted that one day it would come. I didn't think it would come that way, but doesn't matter. It came.
Yeah.
And now I would like to see the federal government say, you know what, we should be subsidizing. I mean, you may not like Elon Musk or not, but you should be subsidizing, because it was like $900 for the satellite and then $161 per month. You go up there, you know what? Let's just pay for these satellites, not for the satellites, but the modems for them for free. We'll subsidize the whole thing, and then it'll cost them $50 a month or something. Get the internet up there at all costs, and then once it's there, well, you see what happens, right?
Yeah, that's fascinating. And admittedly, you're talking to someone whose understanding technology isn't my forte. So my head's wheeling a little bit, and it's very interesting how these opportunities. One thing I had been very excited to hear about a few years ago, and the technology may have already passed this, but that in particular for pipeline projects, for energy projects, there's an opportunity to kind of, in the process of constructing those projects, bring in bring in high-speed internet into some of those northern communities as well. I don't know if that's sort of less necessary now or less effective given the satellite-based opportunities. But if we thought about energy projects as well as bringing that digital technology opportunity. I'm really outing myself as a Luddite here when I'm asking the question, but is that part of it too? Maybe is that energy?
I do.
Yeah. Okay.
I do. I think that I could tell you an awkward story of how I lost a lot of money. There was a couple from Fort McMurray that came down, and they had brought this yellow pages. Remember the yellow pages?
Yeah.
And I was in Ottawa, and they asked me I had a yellow pages for Ottawa, and the yellow pages for Ottawa was like 2-3 inches thick, and the one for Fort McMurray might have been a half inch. And he says, this couple says to me, just can you look up in the Ottawa escort services? I said, I think you have the wrong company. We don't do that kind of thing. And he goes, no, just humor me. So I looked up escort services in the yellow pages of Ottawa, which was 3 inches thick, and I found a page and a half or something. And then he tosses the Fort McMurray yellow page, says, look it up there. It's probably like 7 or 8 pages of escort services. So, and I said, so what's your point here? He says, the point is, there's nothing to do up there. You need to bring the internet. And so I went off and I negotiated the spectrum, and I negotiated the tower rights, and I was trying to work with the local college, and I was trying to get, I guess, what Elon Musk did, but with 1 millionth of the budget, and it didn't work out. It didn't work out, but I can remember thinking, like, to answer your question, you said, is that the way to go? I thought so back then. Didn't work out so well for me. But yes, I do think so now. There are people that are up there and they're lonely and they haven't seen their families because they work at 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks, intervals.
Yeah.
And so if you could give them FaceTiming, FaceTiming with your child is, it's not, it'll never replace being with your child, but you can watch them grow up a little bit, So.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was going to ask you about your own story in terms of the regional dynamic, because one of the things about contracting, procurement is there's relationships involved, even in the age of digital connection. Meeting people face to face matters. Part of your story was moving to Ottawa. It probably would have been difficult for you to build the kind of business you had doing work with the federal government if you hadn't left your community. But you've gone back to your community, I understand. Most Indigenous people in this country, they're living either in their own traditional communities, or if they're living in urban areas, probably much more likely in Western Canada and Northern Canada than in and around kind of the Ottawa, Toronto. So is there a way in the context of Indigenous contracting to think about regional equity as well?
Well, that's what we were working on quite a bit, was trying to bring proper internet technology into communities so that, all the opportunities that were provided to us through Toronto. By the way, Toronto's probably got more Aboriginals, Indigenous people living in there than any other city, but that's just for the size, right?
Yeah.
But no, that's I honestly believe. Do I believe that everybody would stay in there Indigenous? No, some people like to be like to move and travel around, but at least there's a choice.
Yeah.
There was no real choice for me.
Right.
Honestly, I in the industry I was in, there was just no way. I was a coder at first. I used to program, and I was in technical support, and there was just no way it would have worked. But today, well, the way things work, my son just graduated from Algonquin and worked on his first project on a portal that he did entirely from the community. And you wouldn't know that. You wouldn't get on the portal and say, "Oh, I can see this was done on reserve."
Right.
It doesn't make a difference, right?
Yeah.
But and that I see what the vision was. I talked about that for years. I talked about that, and I see it happen.
Yeah.
So, and I see it still happening, you know. So as it relates to Indigenous and economic development, we've come a long way. We really have.
Yeah. But to summarize the policy recommendations, then, right now when the government talks about contracting, they're looking at there's a set aside, there's a quota, and they're looking at the identity of the owner, and there's not a lot of accountability. Whereas what you're emphasizing is a model that focuses on benefits to Indigenous communities and building up those long-term opportunities through access to the internet at a respectable speed, and also education, so that people will be ready and able to seize real opportunities and grow their companies, instead of money getting spent in these kind of suspect joint venture type structures where there's no actual growth and benefit.
So right now, there's no actual growth and benefit.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean there can't be. Donna
Right.
Cona is a perfect example.
Yeah.
What I believe must be done in order for that to happen is accountability. I believe that the government has to say, look, I'm not just going to give you this and you run off. You better be doing this. You better be giving your Aboriginal side more benefits, or the ability to hire administrative staff, the ability to grow a real company, and perhaps do Aboriginal benefits, themselves, like we did.
You've been talking about these issues for a long time. What's your assessment of the motivations of people at the political as well as at the public service level on this? Why haven't they been more responsive to the issues that you and I'm sure others have raised about this?
That's a really good question. I don't know, but it hasn't changed. And when I saw what happened with ArriveScam, by the way, I was shocked. I truly was shocked to see my name on there. But really, that vehicle that we're talking about, the procurement vehicle, that's how Donna Cona got named, because they were using those procurement vehicles as they should. And they were putting them on ArriveScam, and it wasn't up to us to say, no, you can't do this and you can't do that. But anyways, I just feel that unless there's accountability to the non-Indigenous side, there is some to the Indigenous side. And on the Indigenous side, there is there's an audit that's done, and they have to verify that that person is truly who they say they are. Either they're Métis or First Nation or Indigenous or non-status Indian. There's some accountability there. There's some checking on that, but there's no checking, none, zero, on the non-Indigenous side to say, are you giving that? Because the assumption is, well, if they're 51% controlling it, then they're the ones that are in control of it, right? But I can assure you, I've been approached by companies, and when we said that, they said no, but that didn't stop them from finding somewhere else. And then, you go back to Indian Affairs or Indigenous Affairs today, and remember, Indigenous Affairs is a federal government department. If they call up another federal government department and try to say, hey, you did something, no, you know what? You need to mind your own business. And that's also part of why PSABA got started, was because we could go in and complain. We were not government, and we had no core funding. So we could go into any government department and complain. Whereas Indigenous Affairs, remember, they're all kind of linked, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm really enjoying our conversation, John. Thank you for enlightening me about Indigenous contracting, how the internet works, and various other things. Just in the time we have left, I wanted to ask for your reflections in general as a longtime Indigenous business leader on kind of the nature of Crown-Indigenous relations in this country. What do non-Indigenous folks need to know or think about, and with what the polls are suggesting, and I won't ask you to comment on that, but that we may have a new government shortly that will be in a position to think about where things are at, what's going well, what isn't going well. What are your sort of broad suggestions about Crown-Indigenous relations in this country?
Well, maybe it was the timing. And this is no fault of yours, but in New Brunswick, we had a great relationship with the provincial government of New Brunswick. 25, 30 years ago, there was some revenue sharing models built that encouraged First communities to start businesses on reserve and not start their own tax regime and not start their own cannabis and not start their own gaming. So they said, look, if you do this, we'll have this revenue share. Well, 25, 30 years ago, and nobody was making any money. That was all fine. But the moment there was a community that started making some real money, and all of a sudden, we can't have this, and so they canceled it. They canceled after 25 years. They canceled, and you want to talk about bad relationships now? The Indigenous relationship between the Indigenous and the provincial government, because they went off and threw the baby out with the bathwater. There was issues, and I'll even agree that some of the issues were getting out of control, like buying land downtown Moncton and turning it into a reserve. I agree, you shouldn't have done that. But a simple solution would have been, let's sit down, let's say all. The original territorial, grounds, but you're not allowed to expand this and buy up half of Fredericton and do it. Mm-hmm. And anyways, they canceled. So, and I don't know if you were aware of this or not, or that the situation in New Brunswick, but when you're talking about relations, corporate Crown relations and Indigenous, that kind of stuff where when you have something and then you cancel it because you didn't like the way it's going, right. that doesn't help anybody. It really doesn't. But I do think I'm a positive guy, and I do feel that in general it's going well. I am talking to you reaching out. I've talked to others. Others are starting to see, but they just don't know what to do about it. I mean, they see that this thing was abused, or this thing is getting abused. They just don't know what to do about it. And I keep saying, you're looking at the wrong group of people. They're looking at the Indigenous side of things. I say, no, you need to look at the non-Indigenous side and say, you should be doing the Aboriginal benefits, and you should be making sure that it's not being abused, because they're the ones that are going to abuse it to no end. So.
Yeah. Well, I don't know the New Brunswick experiences as well, coming from Western Canada, but I appreciate that context as well. And it's a good reminder when it comes to policies, is to really identify where the problems are specifically, and to deal with those specific problems, and recognize the things, and try to fix them, and recognize the things that are working well, and preserve those as well. Yeah. So, yeah. John, any final things you want to say in wrap up? I'll give the last word to you today.
No, not really. I want to thank you very much for the opportunity. If you go back to the June 2006, I was passionate then. I'm passionate now. I don't speak out as much as I used to. I'm moving more into a retirement. I've done the things that I've preached. Back then I wasn't. I was still on reserve. We did not have high-speed internet. It wasn't really possible for me to run Donna Cona. So here we are 18 years later. It's interesting to see that speech and see it me now. Mm-hmm. And I've been able to do so many things through the success. And those so many things, I would label them Aboriginal benefits. So when I go to my First Nation and start a company that starts making money for my community or empowering my community, that's what I mean by Aboriginal benefits. And I just think that Aboriginal companies can also do Aboriginal benefits, and are more likely to do Aboriginal benefits. Yeah, if they afforded the ability to grow. So
yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for a very enriching conversation. And thank you to all our viewers on YouTube and listeners on the various podcast platforms. You can find Resuming Debate on every podcast platform. And normally we publish every 2 weeks, but as I said at the beginning, we will have a bit of a hiatus over the summer. So look forward to bringing more episodes to you when September rolls around. Have a great summer. Spend some time with your family, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. We look forward to talking to you then.